In the grand halls of Buckingham Palace, where tradition weighs heavier than the crown jewels themselves, a single moment during Christmas filming would reveal the true heart of a king. As cameras rolled for what would become the most watched Christmas address in decades, King Charles III made a decision that surprised even his closest advisors. With millions of eyes waiting to judge his every word, he chose to break royal protocol in the most beautiful way possible. This is the extraordinary true story of how a grandfather's love transcended centuries of royal tradition, and how one gentle gesture during the darkest chapter of the Princess of Wales's life would touch hearts around the world. What happened in those precious minutes would prove that behind the ceremony and formality, the most powerful force in any kingdom is simply human compassion. The morning of December 10, 2024, dawned crisp and clear over Windsor Castle, but inside the ancient walls, tension hung in the air like morning mist. King Charles III stood before his bedroom window, his reflection catching the early light as he adjusted his tie for what felt like the 100th time. Today would mark the filming of his fourth Christmas address to the nation, but this year carried a weight unlike any before. In the months leading up to this moment, the royal family had faced challenges that tested their very foundation. Catherine, Princess of Wales, had been fighting her own private battle, one that had kept her largely out of the public eye for much of 2024. The nation had watched with concern as their beloved princess navigated health challenges that reminded everyone of her humanity beneath the royal title. Charles remembered the conversation with his son William just weeks earlier. They had walked through the gardens at Highgrove, their breath visible in the cold air as they discussed the upcoming Christmas broadcast. William's face had carried the strain of watching his wife struggle while maintaining his royal duties. The prince had spoken quietly about Catherine's courage, her determination to shield their children from worry while facing her own fears. "She doesn't want to be the focus, Papa," William had said, using the childhood name that still slipped out during their most private moments. "She just wants to get better and be there for the children's Christmas morning." The king had nodded, understanding the delicate balance his daughter-in-law was trying to maintain. Catherine had always been different from other members who had married into the royal family. She brought a warmth and authenticity that connected with people in ways that surprised even the most experienced courtiers. Her absence from public engagements had not gone unnoticed by the public, who had grown to love her genuine smile and natural way with children during school visits and community events. Now, as Charles prepared for the Christmas address, he found himself thinking not just as a king, but as a father-in-law and grandfather. The traditional format of royal Christmas messages had remained largely unchanged for decades. The monarch would speak about the year's events, offer reflections on faith and service, and wish the nation well for the coming year. It was dignified, formal, and carefully scripted to avoid any controversy or overly personal revelations. But this year felt different. The King's press secretary, Amanda Foster, had prepared talking points that touched on national achievements, international relations, and the importance of community spirit during challenging times. The speech was polished, appropriate, and thoroughly unremarkable. Charles had read through it multiple times, making minor adjustments to phrasing here and there, but something felt missing. The filming was scheduled for the afternoon in the Blue Drawing Room at Buckingham Palace. The ornate setting, with its magnificent portraits and gilded furniture, provided the perfect backdrop for royal gravitas. Television crews had been setting up since dawn, adjusting lighting and testing camera angles to ensure everything would be perfect for the broadcast that would reach hundreds of millions of people across the Commonwealth. Lady Sarah Morrison, the King's private secretary, knocked gently on his door at precisely 11 o'clock. She entered with her usual efficiency, carrying a leather folder containing the final version of the speech along with briefing notes about the technical aspects of the filming. "Your Majesty, the crew will be ready for rehearsals at 2 o'clock, she reported. "The final filming is scheduled for 4:30, which should give us plenty of time for any adjustments you might want to make." Charles accepted the folder but didn't immediately open it. Instead, he walked to his desk where a collection of family photographs sat alongside official papers and correspondence. His eyes lingered on a recent photo from Louis's birthday party. Catherine was kneeling beside the young prince, helping him blow out candles on his cake. Her smile was radiant, but Charles could see something in her eyes that others might miss. The subtle signs of someone fighting a battle while trying to protect those around her from worry. "Sarah," the king said slowly, "has there been any change in the princess's condition today?" Lady Morrison consulted her notes, though Charles suspected she already knew the answer. Communication between the royal households was constant, especially regarding family health matters. The last report from Adelaide Cottage indicates that Her Royal Highness had a comfortable night and is spending the morning with the children. Prince William is with them as well, as he's cleared his schedule through the weekend. This news brought Charles some comfort. Family time was precious under normal circumstances, but during Catherine's health challenges, it had become even more valuable. The children's Christmas holidays had begun, giving them uninterrupted time together away from the pressures of public duties and media attention. The king opened the speech folder and read through the text one more time. The words were perfectly crafted, each sentence designed to strike the right tone of authority, compassion, and hope. But, as he read, Charles found his mind wandering to memories of Catherine's integration into the royal family. He remembered her first Christmas at Sandringham after her marriage to William. She had been nervous, naturally, about navigating the complex traditions and protocols that came with royal Christmas celebrations. But, what struck Charles most was how quickly she had connected with the children in the family. She had a natural ability to engage with his grandchildren, listening to their stories with genuine interest and joining in their games without any sense of it being beneath her dignity. Catherine had brought something special to the family dynamic. Unlike some family members who maintained formal distance even in private, she had always treated Charles with warmth while still showing appropriate respect for his position. She called him Grandpa Wales when the cameras weren't rolling, a title that never failed to make him smile. The king's thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of his valet, who had come to help him prepare for the day's filming. As he changed into the formal attire selected for the broadcast, Charles found himself making a decision that would surprise everyone involved in the production. Instead of simply delivering the prepared speech, he would find a way to acknowledge Catherine's courage and the family's journey through difficult times. It wouldn't be dramatic or overly emotional, but it would be real. It would be human. It would be the kind of gesture that showed the monarchy's ability to evolve while maintaining its core values of service and dignity. The afternoon rehearsal went smoothly. Charles read through the prepared text, making mental notes about pacing and emphasis. The television crew, led by veteran director Michael Hartwell, provided feedback about camera angles and lighting. Everything was technically perfect, but the king felt disconnected from the words he was speaking. During a break between rehearsals, Charles stepped out onto the palace balcony. London stretched out before him, a city of millions of people who would be listening to his words on Christmas Day. Many of them were facing their own challenges, their own health scares, their own family worries. They deserved more than polished platitudes. They deserved acknowledgement that even royal families faced human struggles. When Charles returned for the final filming, he carried himself differently. The formal posture remained, but there was something more personal in his demeanor. As the cameras began rolling, he started with the prepared opening, speaking about the year's achievements and challenges facing the nation. But then, about halfway through the speech, something changed. The king's voice became softer, more intimate, as he began to speak from the heart rather than from the script. What followed would become one of the most memorable moments in royal broadcasting history, though few people in the room fully understood its significance at the time. The gesture Charles made in those final minutes of filming was subtle but profound. It was the kind of moment that revealed the man behind the monarchy, the father-in-law who had watched his son's wife face challenges with grace and courage. It was a reminder that behind all the ceremony and tradition, the royal family faced the same fundamental human experiences as everyone else. As the cameras stopped rolling and the crew began packing up their equipment, Charles felt a sense of peace about the message he had just delivered. It wasn't perfect according to traditional standards, but it was authentic. It was real. And, sometimes, authenticity was more valuable than perfection. The king's private secretary approached with her usual efficiency, but Charles could see the surprise in her eyes. The broadcast had not gone exactly as planned, but she was experienced enough to recognize when unplanned moments created something more meaningful than any carefully scripted alternative. "Shall we schedule any additional filming, Your Majesty?" she asked diplomatically. Charles shook his head. "No, Sarah. I think we captured exactly what needed to be said." That evening, as Charles reflected on the day's filming, he thought about Catherine's reaction when she eventually saw the broadcast. He hoped she would understand the love and respect behind his words, the recognition of her strength during difficult times. More than anything, he hoped it would remind her that she was valued not just as the Princess of Wales, but as a cherished member of their family. The next few weeks would bring the usual preparations for royal Christmas celebrations. There would be gift exchanges, formal dinners, and the traditional church service at Sandringham. But Charles knew that this Christmas would be different because of what had happened during those few minutes in front of the cameras. As he prepared for bed that night, the king felt confident that his Christmas message would resonate with people in ways that purely formal speeches could not. Sometimes the most powerful royal gestures were also the most human ones, and today had been a perfect example of that truth. The weight of the crown would always be significant, but Charles had learned that it didn't have to prevent genuine human connection. In fact, authentic moments like the one he had just created might be exactly what the modern monarchy needed to remain relevant and beloved by the people it served. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but tonight, Charles slept peacefully, knowing that he had honored both his role as king and his love for his family in exactly the way that felt right. The morning after the Christmas broadcast filming, whispers began circulating through the corridors of Buckingham Palace. Staff members who had witnessed the recording were quietly discussing what they had seen, though professional discretion kept their conversations measured and respectful. Something unexpected had happened during those final minutes of filming, and everyone sensed its significance even if they couldn't fully articulate why. Rebecca Martinez, a junior communications assistant who had been taking notes during the filming, found herself replaying the king's words in her mind as she transcribed the technical details of the production. She had worked on royal broadcasts before, but this one felt different. There had been a moment when King Charles seemed to step outside the formal boundaries of royal communication, speaking with an intimacy that made even the camera crew lean in slightly. In the private apartments of Kensington Palace, Prince William was reviewing his own schedule when his phone buzzed with a text from his father. The message was brief but loaded with meaning. "I hope I did the right thing today. Spoke from the heart about C. Will explain when we meet." William immediately understood the reference. His father had been struggling with how to acknowledge Catherine's health journey without violating her privacy or creating unwanted media attention. The prince had seen Charles wrestling with the balance between his public role and his personal feelings about his daughter-in-law's situation. Setting aside his papers, William walked to the window overlooking Kensington Gardens. The trees were bare, their branches creating intricate patterns against the gray December sky. It reminded him of the delicate balance they all maintained between public duty and private life. Catherine's illness had made that balance even more precarious, as every absence from public engagements sparked speculation and concern among both media and the public. The conversation between father and son had been building for weeks. Charles had confided his frustration at watching Catherine's courage go unacknowledged while maintaining the stoic silence that royal protocol typically demanded. The king understood the importance of medical privacy, but he also recognized that Catherine's grace under pressure deserved recognition. Meanwhile, at Adelaide Cottage, Catherine herself was enjoying a rare morning of normalcy with her children. 9-year-old George was helping 7-year-old Charlotte with a jigsaw puzzle while 5-year-old Louis built an elaborate castle with his blocks. The princess sat curled in an armchair, wearing comfortable clothes and savoring a cup of tea while watching her children play. These moments had become even more precious during her health challenges. The treatments had left her tired some days, but she was determined to maintain as much routine as possible for the children. Their Christmas holidays provided an opportunity for extended family time without the pressure of public commitments. Catherine's phone displayed several missed calls from Jenny Morrison, her private secretary, but she had decided to let them wait until after lunch. The children's laughter filled the room as Louis's block tower toppled over, causing giggles all around. These were the sounds that sustained her through difficult days, reminding her why fighting to get better was so important. Back at Buckingham Palace, the King's communications team was beginning to process what had happened during the filming. Director Michael Hartwell had worked on royal broadcasts for over 15 years, but he found himself unusually moved by what he had witnessed. The spontaneous moment when Charles deviated from his prepared remarks had created something genuinely touching. "It was extraordinary," Hartwell confided to his assistant as they reviewed the footage. "You could see the exact moment when he decided to speak as a family member rather than just as the monarch. The camera caught something really special. The technical quality of the broadcast was flawless, but, more importantly, it contained something that couldn't be scripted or manufactured. Authentic emotion had transformed a routine royal communication into something that would resonate with viewers on a deeply human level." Lady Sarah Morrison was already fielding subtle inquiries from other royal households about the content of the Christmas message. Word had begun to spread that this year's broadcast contained something unexpected, though the specific details remained closely guarded until the official release. In the days following the filming, Charles found himself thinking frequently about Catherine's reaction to his gesture. He knew that she valued privacy and might initially be concerned about any public attention focused on her health situation. However, he hoped she would understand that his words came from a place of love and respect rather than any desire to sensationalize her experience. The relationship between Charles and Catherine had developed gradually over the years since her marriage to William. Initially formal and somewhat cautious, it had evolved into genuine affection and mutual respect. Catherine's natural warmth had won over the king, while her dedication to royal duties and her obvious love for William and the children had earned his deep appreciation. Charles remembered a conversation they had shared during a family gathering at Balmoral the previous summer. Catherine had been helping with preparations for a barbecue, working alongside staff with no concern for protocol or formality. When Charles had joked that she didn't need to help with such preparations, she had smiled and said, "But this is family time, and family helps family." That simple statement had perfectly captured what Catherine brought to the royal family. She understood the difference between public duty and private relationships, and she navigated both with equal grace. Her approach had influenced the entire family dynamic, creating space for more authentic interactions even within the constraints of royal life. Now, as Catherine faced health challenges, Charles felt that same family solidarity should extend to public acknowledgement of her courage. The Christmas broadcast provided an opportunity to recognize her strength without exploiting her vulnerability. The week following the filming was busy with final preparations for the Christmas broadcast. Technical editors worked to ensure perfect audio and visual quality, while Palace Communications staff coordinated the global distribution that would reach audiences across the Commonwealth. Every detail was scrutinized to maintain the dignity and excellence expected from royal broadcasts. But, beneath all the technical preparations, there was an underlying sense of anticipation about how the public would respond to the more personal elements of this year's message. Royal Christmas broadcasts typically generated polite appreciation and respectful commentary, but this year felt different. Charles received a call from his sister, Princess Anne, who had heard rumors about the broadcast's content through the royal family's informal communication network. Anne, known for her direct approach, didn't waste time with preliminaries. "I heard you went off script a bit during the filming," she said. "Good for you. Sometimes the best moments come when we speak from the heart rather than from prepared remarks." Her support meant a great deal to Charles, as Anne was often the family member most willing to speak difficult truths. If she approved of his decision to acknowledge Catherine's situation, it suggested that his instincts had been correct. The conversation with Anne reminded Charles of why he had felt compelled to make the gesture in the first place. The monarchy's survival and relevance depended on its ability to connect with people's real experiences. Catherine's health journey was something that millions of families could understand and relate to. Acknowledging it with appropriate dignity could strengthen rather than weaken the royal family's bond with the public. As the days passed, preparations began for the traditional royal Christmas celebrations at Sandringham. The estate would host the extended royal family for the holidays, continuing traditions that stretched back generations. This year, those traditions would be especially meaningful given the challenges the family had faced. Catherine's participation in the Christmas celebrations remained uncertain, depending on how she felt and what her medical team recommended. The family was prepared to adapt their plans to accommodate her needs, prioritizing her comfort and recovery above traditional protocols. Charles found himself looking forward to Christmas morning more than usual. The gift exchanges, family breakfast, and church service would provide opportunities for the kind of authentic family interactions that had inspired his Christmas broadcast gesture. Sometimes the most important royal duties were simply being present for family members during difficult times. The king's decision to acknowledge Catherine's courage in his Christmas message had emerged from these fundamental family values. It represented his understanding that true leadership sometimes meant showing vulnerability and humanity rather than maintaining distant perfection. As Christmas approached, the completed broadcast waited for its Christmas Day debut. The editing had preserved the spontaneous moment when Charles spoke from his heart, creating a message that balanced royal dignity with human authenticity. It would soon reach audiences around the world, carrying with it a gentle tribute to a beloved family member's courage during challenging times. The anticipation building around the broadcast reflected something deeper than curiosity about royal communications. It suggested that people were hungry for authentic leadership that acknowledged real human experiences rather than hiding behind institutional formality. Charles's gesture toward Catherine had tapped into that desire for genuine connection between the monarchy and the people it served. In the quiet moments before the broadcast's release, the king felt confident that his decision to speak from the heart had been the right one. Sometimes the most powerful gestures were also the most subtle, and sometimes the best way to honor someone's courage was simply to acknowledge it with love and respect. Christmas morning arrived with the crisp clarity that often blessed Sandringham during the holidays. The estate bustled with quiet activity as staff prepared for the royal family's traditional celebrations. In homes across the nation and Commonwealth, families gathered around televisions, preparing to hear King Charles III deliver his fourth Christmas address to the nation. At Adelaide Cottage, Catherine woke early despite having no official obligations for the day. The house was still quiet, with William and the children sleeping peacefully. She made herself tea and settled into the sitting room, where morning light filtered through frost-covered windows. For the first time in months, she felt genuinely rested and optimistic about the day ahead. The princess had deliberately avoided asking William about his father's Christmas broadcast. She knew that Charles had been concerned about her health situation and suspected he might reference it somehow, but she trusted his judgment about what was appropriate to share publicly. Their relationship had developed into one of mutual respect and genuine affection, built on years of family gatherings and shared experiences. Meanwhile, at Sandringham House, the royal family was gathering for their traditional Christmas morning routine. Charles had woken before dawn, as he often did, and spent time in quiet reflection before the day's celebrations began. Today felt especially significant, knowing that millions of people would soon hear his message and, particularly, his tribute to Catherine's courage. The king's decision to acknowledge Catherine in his Christmas address had not been made lightly. Royal protocols typically prevented personal references to family members' private challenges, but Charles had concluded that Catherine's grace under pressure deserved recognition. Her dignity throughout her health journey had exemplified the values that the monarchy sought to represent. As families across the Commonwealth settled in to watch the broadcast, few anticipated the emotional impact of what they were about to witness. The Christmas address had been pre-recorded, as always, but something about this year's message felt different from the moment it began. King Charles appeared on screen in the blue drawing room at Buckingham Palace, surrounded by the formal grandeur that viewers expected from royal broadcasts. He began with traditional remarks about the year's events, speaking about community resilience, international cooperation, and the importance of service to others. But then, approximately 6 minutes into the address, something shifted. The king's tone became noticeably warmer and more personal as he began to speak about family and the courage that ordinary people showed during extraordinary circumstances. "This year has reminded us all that life brings unexpected challenges," Charles said, his voice carrying a depth of emotion that surprised viewers. "In my own family, I have witnessed remarkable courage and grace in the face of uncertainty. My daughter-in-law, Catherine, has shown us all what it means to face difficulties with dignity and strength." The camera remained focused on the king's face as he continued. Her quiet determination to protect her children while managing her own challenges has been an inspiration to those of us who love her. It reminds us that true nobility lies not in titles or ceremonies, but in how we care for one another during life's most difficult moments. Charles paused briefly, allowing the weight of his words to settle before continuing with the remainder of his prepared remarks. But those few sentences about Catherine would become the most discussed and remembered portion of the entire broadcast. In living rooms across Britain and the Commonwealth, viewers found themselves unexpectedly moved by the king's personal revelation. Many had followed Catherine's reduced public schedule with concern, but hearing Charles acknowledge her situation with such warmth and respect created a powerful moment of human connection. Sarah Henderson, watching with her family in Manchester, felt tears forming as she heard the king's words. Her own mother was fighting cancer, and something about Charles's tribute to Catherine's courage resonated deeply with her family's experience. "It's so rare to hear royalty speak about real life like that," she whispered to her husband. Similar reactions were occurring in countless homes as viewers connected with the genuine emotion in the king's voice. The formal distance typically associated with royal communications had been replaced by something much more intimate and relatable. At Sandringham, family members watched the broadcast together, many hearing the full content for the first time. Princess Anne nodded approvingly during Charles's tribute to Catherine, while Prince Edward and Sophie exchanged meaningful glances. The gesture perfectly captured their collective admiration for how Catherine had handled her health challenges while maintaining her family responsibilities. Social media began buzzing immediately after the broadcast ended. Viewers shared their emotional reactions to the king's tribute, with many praising his decision to acknowledge Catherine's courage publicly. The hashtag Catherine Courage began trending within hours, as people shared their own stories of facing health challenges with dignity. Royal commentator Victoria Ashworth, watching from her home in London, immediately recognized the significance of what Charles had done. "This changes everything," she told her editor over the phone. "The king just showed us a completely different model of royal communication. It's personal, it's real, and it's incredibly powerful. The decision to break traditional royal protocol by acknowledging a family member's private struggles represented a significant evolution in how the monarchy connected with the public. Charles had recognized that authentic human moments could strengthen rather than weaken the institution's relevance and appeal. Back at Adelaide Cottage, Catherine finally watched the broadcast during the afternoon, with William beside her and the children playing quietly nearby. When Charles's tribute began, she felt a complex mixture of emotions. Initially, there was concern about the public attention it might generate, but that quickly gave way to gratitude for the love and respect evident in his words. "He didn't have to do that," Catherine said quietly to William, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, he did," William replied, taking her hand. "Because it's true, and because people needed to hear it. You've been incredibly brave, and Papa wanted everyone to know that." The broadcast had achieved something remarkable by balancing royal dignity with human authenticity. Charles's tribute to Catherine felt neither forced nor exploitative, but rather like a natural expression of family love that happened to occur within a formal royal communication. Throughout the afternoon and evening, responses to the broadcast continued to pour in from around the world. Commonwealth leaders praised the king's message, with several noting how his personal remarks had enhanced rather than detracted from the broader themes of service and resilience. The Archbishop of Canterbury issued a statement praising the broadcast's emphasis on supporting family members during difficult times, calling it a beautiful example of how love and duty can work together rather than in opposition. International media coverage focused heavily on the king's tribute to Catherine, with many outlets noting how the gesture represented a new approach to royal communication. The coverage was overwhelmingly positive, with commentators praising Charles for showing that the monarchy could be both dignified and genuinely human. By evening, it was clear that the Christmas broadcast had achieved something unprecedented in recent royal history. It had created a genuine moment of emotional connection between the monarchy and the public, demonstrating that authentic leadership could emerge from acknowledging shared human experiences. Charles spent Christmas evening at Sandringham feeling deeply satisfied with the public response to his gesture. Phone calls from other family members confirmed that his tribute to Catherine had been well received, and early media coverage suggested that it had strengthened public affection for both Catherine and the royal family generally. The king's decision to speak from the heart rather than stick strictly to prepared remarks had paid off in ways that exceeded his expectations. The broadcast had shown that the monarchy's greatest strength might lie not in maintaining formal distance, but in finding appropriate ways to acknowledge the real human experiences that connected the royal family to the people they served. As the day ended, Charles reflected on the courage it had taken to break from traditional royal communication protocols. But, seeing the positive response from both family members and the public confirmed that sometimes the most important leadership decisions involved showing vulnerability and humanity rather than maintaining institutional distance. The Christmas address had become more than just an annual royal duty, it had become a demonstration of how authentic emotion could enhance rather than compromise royal dignity. Charles's gentle tribute to Catherine's courage would be remembered long after the formal portions of the broadcast were forgotten, proving that the most powerful royal gestures often emerged from the simplest human truths. The days following King Charles's Christmas broadcast brought a flood of responses that surprised even the most experienced royal communications staff. Letters, emails, and social media messages poured into Buckingham Palace from people around the world who had been touched by the king's tribute to Catherine's courage. The volume and emotional depth of the responses indicated that something truly significant had occurred. Margaret Thornton, the head of royal correspondence, had managed public responses to royal communications for over 2 decades, but she had never seen anything quite like this. The letters aren't just polite acknowledgments, she explained to her team during their first meeting after Christmas. People are sharing their own stories of facing health challenges, of watching family members show courage during difficult times. It's as if the king's words gave them permission to talk about their own experiences. One letter that particularly moved the correspondence team came from a woman in Australia whose daughter had been fighting leukemia. She wrote, "Hearing His Majesty speak about the Princess of Wales with such love and pride reminded me that my daughter's courage deserves the same recognition. Sometimes we forget to tell the people we love how brave they are, especially when we're all just trying to get through each day." Similar sentiments arrived from across the Commonwealth and beyond. A man in Canada shared how the broadcast had inspired him to write a letter to his wife, acknowledging her strength during her battle with multiple sclerosis. A family in New Zealand described how the king's words had helped them process their grandmother's recent diagnosis with dementia, giving them a framework for honoring her dignity while facing an uncertain future. The international media coverage continued to focus on the unprecedented nature of Charles's personal revelation. Royal biographer Dr. Elizabeth Hartley appeared on multiple television programs, explaining the significance of the gesture within the broader context of royal communication traditions. What King Charles did was revolutionary in the most gentle way possible, Dr. Hartley explained during an interview on BBC News. He maintained complete dignity and respect for Catherine's privacy while acknowledging the human reality of what their family has experienced. It shows a monarchy that can evolve without losing its essential character. The contrast with previous generations of royal communication was stark. Historical precedent suggested that royal families maintained complete public silence about personal health matters, viewing such privacy as essential to institutional dignity. Charles's decision to acknowledge Catherine's courage while respecting her privacy represented a new model for how the monarchy might engage with public emotions. Prince William found himself fielding calls from various family members and close friends who wanted to discuss the impact of his father's tribute. The responses were uniformly positive, but what struck William most was how many people mentioned that the gesture had changed their perception of the entire royal family. It made them seem more real, explained one of William's longtime friends during a private conversation. Not less royal, but more human. It reminded people why they care about your family in the first place. This insight proved particularly significant as palace communications staff analyzed the broader implications of the broadcast's reception. The overwhelmingly positive response suggested that public appetite for authentic royal communication was much stronger than traditional protocol had assumed. Catherine herself continued to receive the responses with a mixture of gratitude and slight bewilderment. She had always maintained that her health journey was a private matter, but seeing how Charles's tribute had inspired others to share their own stories of courage made her reconsider the potential value of appropriate public acknowledgement. During a quiet conversation with William, Catherine reflected on the unexpected outcomes of the broadcast. "I never thought my situation could help other people," she admitted. "But reading some of these letters, it seems like there's something powerful about acknowledging that everyone faces difficult times, even people in privileged positions." This realization would prove influential in shaping Catherine's own future approach to public engagements and communications. The experience taught her that vulnerability, when handled with appropriate dignity, could actually strengthen rather than weaken public connection and trust. Meanwhile, palace staff were working to manage the practical implications of the broadcast's success. The volume of correspondence required additional resources, and communications staff needed to develop new protocols for responding to the more personal nature of many messages. King Charles took personal interest in reviewing a representative sample of the letters and messages. Reading about how his words had affected real people reinforced his conviction that the gesture had been appropriate and worthwhile. One letter from a young father whose wife was undergoing chemotherapy particularly moved him. "Your Majesty's tribute to the Princess of Wales gave our family language to talk about my wife's strength," the man had written. "Our children now understand that Mama isn't sick because she's weak, but that she's fighting hard because she's incredibly strong. Thank you for helping us find the right words." Such responses validated Charles's belief that royal communications could serve purposes beyond formal duty. When handled with appropriate sensitivity, personal acknowledgments could provide comfort and inspiration to people facing similar challenges. The international scope of the positive response also reinforced the global reach and influence of royal communications. Messages arrived from countries across 6 continents, indicating that the themes of family love and courage during adversity transcended cultural and geographical boundaries. Commonwealth leaders began incorporating references to the Christmas broadcast into their own communications, praising Charles's demonstration of how leadership could balance institutional dignity with human authenticity. Several noted that the gesture had strengthened their own nation's connections to the monarchy by showing its continued relevance to real human experiences. The success of the broadcast also influenced other royal family members' approaches to their own communications. Princess Anne, typically known for her straightforward and practical public statements, began incorporating slightly more personal elements into her speeches and public remarks. Prince Edward and Sophie, the Earl and Countess of Wessex, found that audiences at their engagements were more responsive and emotionally engaged following the Christmas broadcast. People seemed more willing to share their own stories and experiences, creating richer interactions during royal visits. The ripple effects extended beyond immediate family members to the broader institution of the monarchy. Palace staff reported that public engagement events were attracting more diverse audiences and generating more meaningful conversations about the royal family's role in contemporary society. Royal protection officers, who often served as informal barometers of public sentiment during public engagements, reported noticeable changes in how people approached and interacted with royal family members. The conversations were warmer, more personal, and often included references to Catherine's courage and the family's handling of challenging times. Educational institutions began using the Christmas broadcast as a case study in effective leadership communication. Business schools analyzed how Charles had balanced institutional requirements with personal authenticity, while communication programs examined the techniques that had made his tribute so emotionally resonant. The broadcast's success also influenced discussions about the future of royal communications more broadly. Palace communications staff began exploring ways to incorporate more authentic personal elements into routine royal messaging without compromising dignity or privacy. As January progressed, it became clear that the Christmas broadcast had achieved something unprecedented in recent royal history. It had demonstrated that the monarchy's greatest strength lay not in maintaining emotional distance from the people it served, but in finding appropriate ways to acknowledge shared human experiences. The lessons learned from the public response would influence royal communications strategy for years to come, establishing new principles for how the family could remain both dignified and genuinely connected to the people who looked to them for leadership and inspiration. Charles's gentle tribute to Catherine's courage had not only honored a beloved family member but had also shown a new path forward for royal communication in the modern era. Sometimes the most revolutionary changes emerged from the simplest expressions of love and respect, proving that authentic emotion could enhance rather than compromise institutional dignity. 6 months after King Charles's memorable Christmas address, the long-term impact of his tribute to Catherine continued to resonate in ways that surprised everyone involved. What had begun as a spontaneous gesture of family love had evolved into a new paradigm for royal communication, influencing everything from public engagement strategies to the way other world leaders approached personal challenges in their official roles. Catherine herself had returned to public duties gradually, her recovery allowing her to resume the charitable work that had always been central to her royal identity. Her first major public appearance since the Christmas broadcast came in March, when she attended the opening of a new children's hospital wing in London. The reception she received that day demonstrated just how profoundly the King's tribute had affected public perception. The crowd gathered outside the hospital was notably different from typical royal event audiences. While maintaining appropriate respect and enthusiasm, people approached Catherine with a warmth that felt more personal and supportive than the usual admiration afforded to royal figures. Many in the crowd held signs with messages of support and courage, and several people called out words of encouragement that referenced the Christmas broadcast. "Thank you for showing us what real strength looks like," called out one woman from the crowd, her voice carrying clearly in the crisp spring air. Catherine smiled and waved, but those close enough could see the emotion in her eyes at such displays of support. Inside the hospital, Catherine's interactions with patients and staff revealed how the experience of public acknowledgement had influenced her own approach to her royal duties. During a conversation with a young patient undergoing treatment for cancer, she spoke with a directness and authenticity that felt new and powerful. "Sometimes being brave doesn't mean not being scared," Catherine told 8-year-old Emma, who was nervously preparing for surgery the next day. "It means doing what you need to do even when you are scared. That's what real courage looks like." The conversation was overheard by several hospital staff members, who later remarked that Catherine's words carried an authority that only came from personal experience. Her health journey had not weakened her ability to serve in her royal role, instead, it had deepened her capacity to connect with others facing similar challenges. Dr. Michael Reynolds, a hospital's chief pediatric oncologist, reflected on Catherine's visit months later during a medical conference. "The Princess of Wales brought something unique to her interactions with our young patients," he explained to his colleagues. "She wasn't just offering polite encouragement, she was sharing wisdom earned through her own difficult experience. The children could sense the authenticity, and it made a real difference in their outlook." Meanwhile, King Charles was observing the ongoing effects of his Christmas tribute with satisfaction and some amazement. The decision to acknowledge Catherine's courage had been made instinctively, driven by love and respect rather than strategic communication planning. Yet the results had exceeded anything that formal planning might have achieved. The correspondence that continued to arrive at Buckingham Palace months after the broadcast provided compelling evidence of the gesture's lasting impact. Palace staff had established a special filing system for letters specifically referencing the Christmas tribute, and, by June, they had received over 50,000 such messages from around the world. One letter that particularly moved Charles came from a school in rural Wales, where a teacher had shared the story of the Christmas broadcast with her students during a lesson about courage and leadership. The 11-year-old students had written collective letters to Catherine, expressing their admiration for her bravery and sharing their own stories of overcoming challenges. Dear Princess Catherine, one letter read in careful handwriting, "My mum says you were very brave when you were sick. I was brave too when I had to go to hospital for my broken arm. Thank you for showing us that even princesses have to be brave sometimes. That makes me feel better about being scared." Such responses demonstrated that the Christmas tribute had achieved something far beyond acknowledging Catherine's courage. It had created permission for people of all ages to discuss their own vulnerabilities and strengths more openly. The academic study of the Christmas broadcast continued throughout the following year, with researchers from multiple disciplines examining its communication techniques and social impact. Professor Sarah Williams from Oxford University's Department of Social Policy published a paper analyzing how the broadcast had influenced public discourse about health, family, and leadership. King Charles's tribute to the Princess of Wales represented a masterclass in authentic leadership communication, Professor Williams wrote. By acknowledging vulnerability while maintaining dignity, he demonstrated that strength and transparency are not mutually exclusive. The public response suggests a deep hunger for this kind of authentic engagement from public figures. The broadcast's influence extended beyond academic analysis to practical applications in various fields. Corporate leadership training programs began incorporating case studies of Charles's communication approach, examining how leaders could acknowledge team members' challenges while maintaining organizational dignity and effectiveness. Medical professionals reported that patients frequently referenced the Christmas broadcast when discussing their own treatment journeys. The example of Catherine's grace under pressure, as described by the king, provided a framework for thinking about illness and recovery that emphasized dignity and courage rather than victimhood or shame. Dr. Jennifer Foster, a clinical psychologist specializing in helping families cope with serious illness, incorporated themes from the broadcast into her therapeutic approach. Having a public figure like King Charles acknowledge that strength and vulnerability can coexist gave my patients language to reframe their own experiences, she explained. Instead of seeing their fears as weakness, they began to understand courage as the ability to face uncertainty with grace. The international diplomatic community also took notice of the broadcast's approach and impact. Several world leaders began incorporating more personal elements into their own communications, recognizing that authentic human connection could enhance rather than diminish their authority and effectiveness. Canadian Prime Minister Jennifer Morrison referenced the Christmas broadcast during her own address about mental health awareness, noting how Charles's example had shown that acknowledging personal challenges could strengthen rather than weaken public trust. Similar references appeared in speeches by leaders across the Commonwealth and beyond. As the first anniversary of the Christmas broadcast approached, Palace Communications staff began planning how to acknowledge its impact while maintaining the authentic spirit that had made it so effective. The challenge was to recognize the significance of the gesture without turning it into a calculated publicity strategy. Charles himself remained somewhat amazed by the lasting influence of what he had considered a simple expression of family love. During a private conversation with Catherine in November, he reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with his spontaneous tribute. "I never imagined that speaking from the heart about your courage would touch so many people," Charles told his daughter-in-law as they walked through the gardens at Highgrove. "It's taught me something important about the difference between communicating as a monarch and communicating as a human being." Catherine's response revealed how the experience had influenced her own understanding of her public role. "What you did that Christmas showed me that vulnerability isn't something to hide from," she replied. "When handled with dignity and respect, it can actually help people feel less alone in their own struggles." This insight had begun to influence Catherine's own public engagements and communications. Her speeches at charity events increasingly acknowledged the real challenges that people faced, while her interactions during hospital visits and community engagements carried an authenticity that came from her own experience of navigating difficult times with grace. The Christmas broadcast had also influenced the royal family's approach to supporting each other through public and private challenges. The positive response to Charles's tribute had demonstrated that family love and institutional dignity could work together rather than in opposition, creating new possibilities for how they supported each other during difficult times. As Christmas approached again, Charles found himself reflecting on the year that had passed since his memorable tribute to Catherine. The gesture had not only honored a beloved family member but had also demonstrated a new model for royal leadership that balanced institutional requirements with authentic human connection. The legacy of that Christmas morning would continue to influence royal communications for years to come, proving that sometimes the most powerful leadership moments emerged from the simplest expressions of love, respect, and recognition of shared human experiences. Charles's gentle tribute to Catherine's courage had become far more than a family gesture. It had become a demonstration of how authentic emotion could enhance rather than compromise the dignity and effectiveness of public leadership. The story of the Christmas broadcast would be remembered not just as a touching family moment, but as a turning point in how the monarchy connected with the people it served, showing that the most powerful royal gestures often emerged from the most fundamentally human truths about love, courage, and family support during life's most challenging times.